Hello, everyone. Mark Decote here with a special announcement before I get on with the podcast. First of all, I want to thank everybody who's helped nominate Resourceful Designer for a podcast award this year. Now, there is still time if you haven't done so. The nomination process is open till the end of July. So if you enjoy the podcast, I encourage you to please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/podcast awards and nominate Resourceful Designer in the arts category. I'm also listed under the People's Choice category, so feel free to include that nomination as well. But really, it's the arts category that I'm going for. So thank you once again for your nomination. Now, I do have a second announcement to share with you. I will be in Anaheim, California on Tuesday, August 22nd, and I would love to meet any of my listeners from that area and go out for lunch. If you live in or if you will be in the Anaheim area on August 22nd, 2017, I would like to meet you. If you are available, please email me at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com and we can get things coordinated. I'd love to meet as many of you as I can. And now, on with the show. Resourceful Designer, episode 81, Protecting Yourself from Proofing Errors.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He prefers Marvel Comics over DC, Mark Decote.
Thank you so much for pressing play right now. You really don't know how much it means to me that you're taking time to listen to little old me talk about running a graphic design business. Now, this is going to be a little bit shorter episode than normal. I'm not going to include a listener question this week. I'm in the middle of a little impromptu holiday this week. You see, my wife took the week off, and I wasn't planning on having the week off, but my workload wasn't that heavy, and I was able to shift things around to take a couple of days to spend with her. So that's what I've been doing. So I'm going to forego the listener question this week, but if you do have a question you would like me to answer on a future episode of the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback and submit your question. I don't think I have very many questions left to keep going. So if you want your question answered in a timely manner, get it in as soon as possible. And now, this week's resource of the week. Now, this week's resource is a website called coolors.co, and that's COOLORS.co. It's like the American spelling of colors with an extra O at the beginning. Now, what this website is it's a super fast and super easy way to create, save, and share color palettes for whatever job you're working on. Now, personally, I've been using the Adobe Color, which is color.adobe.com website for a long time now in order to choose colors for any web projects I'm working on. And then I discovered this website, coolors.co. And I have to say, I've made the switch. I love this site. It is so easy to use. And what I like about it is it's not just hex colors. You can get RGB, lab colors, Pantone colors, CMYK, any sort of color. And if you have a certain palette that you're working with to begin with, like say you did a logo for a client and there are 1 or 2 or 3 colors that you want to use in the color palette for whatever project you're working on, doesn't have to be a website in this case, you can input those colors on the page and it'll lock them in. You lock in those colors. And then all you do is you hit the space bar, and every time you hit the space bar, the remaining colors will shift and give you pleasing colors that go with the ones you have selected. So I absolutely love this website. I've been using it for every website that I'm creating, and I've started using it for some other jobs as well, because again, you can get the Pantone colors. So if you put in, say, a reflex blue and maybe a Pantone 185 and whatever other color you put in there, just hitting the space bar will rotate through other colors that can go on that palette. Now, I know my description is not really giving it justice, so please go and visit coolors.co, that's COOLORS.co, and give it a try. And best of all, it's absolutely free to use. And if you sign up, you can save your color palettes for future use. And as I said, I used to use Adobe Color, and now I've switched over to this one because I find it so easy. And I really like the way you can discover colors. There's an explore feature that'll show you ready-made palettes that you can choose. Or as I said, you just pick the ones you like, add in some certain colors, or even go through a palette that is completely random. And when you see a color you like, you lock it in place and then you keep alternating the other colors. So anyways, give it a try. I'm sure you're going to love it. Now, I want to thank everyone who signed up to be a patron of Resourceful Designer. If you enjoy this podcast, if you get any value out of this podcast, I would really appreciate it if you headed over to resourcefuldesigner.com/Patreon. That's Patreon. And for as little as $1 per month, you can help support the podcasts. All proceeds raised through Patreon help cover the cost of producing and maintaining this podcast. So once again, thank you to everyone who's already signed up. And now, protecting yourself from proofing errors. I got the idea for this episode from a recent discussion in the Resourceful Designer Facebook group. Now, if you're not a member of the Facebook group, you really, really should be. And to join, all you have to do is visit resourcefuldesigner.com/group, and it'll redirect you to the page where you can ask to join, because we have a wonderful community of like-minded designers in there helping each other out. Now, this past week, Heather had an issue that she posted in the group. She had a print job, and when she submitted a proof to the client that contained a list of names that she took from a previous year's piece, the client signed off on it. A new list of names was never supplied to her, and she had no reason to think that the list she had used wasn't good. And the client saw multiple proofs. They even went so far as asking her to change the order of names on that list from last name to first name in alphabetical order, further solidifying in her mind that the names were okay. And she mentioned that after 6 revisions in total, the final draft was approved and signed off by the client, and the job was sent to the printer. It was only once they received the printed piece that the client realized that the list of names was last year's list and not the new list that was never supplied to her. So the question is, who is responsible for the job being printed with an error on it? Now, I'm not asking you to answer that, but as we know, anyone who's been in this business long enough knows the clients will almost always try to blame you when something goes wrong. And you know what? You can't really blame them. It is human nature to try and pass the blame. We've been doing it since we were young. I mean, even a toddler who snuck a cookie he wasn't supposed to might try to blame it on maybe one of his siblings, maybe even the family dog, because he or she doesn't want to be blamed for it. It's human instinct. And it's because of that instinct that we, as designers, need to protect ourselves. Because when it comes to graphic design, especially when printing is involved, there's a lot more at stake than a simple reprimand from eating a cookie. Now, it's not a big deal when it's a website or some other digital project, because those errors can easily be fixed if found. But fixing an error on a printing job could cost thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you don't want that to fall on you. So the question is, how do you protect yourself from proofing errors? Well, the short answer is you can't. Proofing errors are going to happen. It's the blame you're trying to protect yourself from. And it all starts with your contract. Please, if you are not already doing so, get yourself a contract. I was lucky. I worked for I don't know how many years without a contract before I started using one. And I was extremely lucky that nothing ever came back and bit me in the butt because of it. But now I use a contract for every job. Or maybe I shouldn't say that. I use a contract with every client. There are certain clients that I do have a blanket contract signed by them so that I don't have to get a new contract issued every time they send me something, because they send me stuff weekly or a couple of times a month. So it would get cumbersome if I had them sign a new contract every time. So I do have a blanket contract that I have with them on file. But when it comes to protecting yourself, it does all start with your contract. A contract may be full of unintelligible legalese, but all that bloated wording in there is there for a reason. It is there to protect you. Yes, it's there to protect the client as well, but when you're viewing it, it's more important that it's protecting you. Now, your contract must, not should, your contract must have a clause absolving you of any blame once the client approves and signs off on a job. Once they sign off, it's in their hands. That's why you should never accept an approval that says, we approve this job with this one small change. If a client sends you that, do not accept it. I have personally blown deadlines because the client asked for a small minor change at the very last minute, and I refused to send the job to print without their seeing and approving that change. Now, again, if this is a digital job or a website, yeah, okay, I'll make the change. And if we find out there's an error afterwards, it can easily be fixed. But on a print job, I will not send a job to print unless I get approval on the final draft. And it doesn't matter how trivial that change is. You need to have it viewed and approved by the client. I know it sounds so innocent. You think to yourself that, oh, the client said they'd approve it, but there was one paragraph that was missing a period at the end. So I'll just add the period and then I'll send the file to print. Don't do it. Get the client to sign it off with the period added to the paragraph. Because every time you touch a project, there's a possibility that something goes wrong. So don't take any chances. Get the client to approve every change they ask for. Here's an example of something I've actually seen happen. A client sends an approval back saying, everything is perfect. The only thing is, on page 3, can you change S. Thompson to read Steve Thompson? Well, sounds innocent enough. They even told you that it's Steve. So you go in, find page 3, find where it says S. Thompson, make the change from S to Steve. You notice that the text doesn't reflow anything strange, because that is a possibility. Changing S to Steve could make the entire page reflow. But in this case, it doesn't. It just makes that one line a little bit longer. So you say, client doesn't need to see that. So you send the job off to print, only to get the printed copy back and realize that S. Thompson appeared 3 times on that page, and the client meant for you to change it all 3 times. That's the sort of thing that could easily be avoided by getting the client to approve the final copy. They would have looked and said, oh, you changed the first one, but you missed the other 2. Because in your rush to get something done, you might have just started reading through the copy where, oh, there, S. Thompson, I'll make the change. And then you stop. You don't think to finish reading the rest of the page. And that error is something that, if gone to print, could be on you because you didn't get the client to approve the final draft. So always, always, always get the client to sign off on the final one without any additional changes. Now, going back to your contract should state that the client is fully responsible for making sure every aspect of the job is satisfactory and to their liking and error-free. That includes the layout, the text, the copy. And I do include those separately. Text and copy is not the same thing. The text I put down as the font that's being used, the way the font is applied, the size, the leading, anything that has to do with it, where the copy is the actual content, the wording. So in my contract, I actually differentiate the two as the text and the copy, as well as images, color, folding, etc., etc., etc. But for now, we're talking about proofreading errors, so we'll stick to copy. So the client is fully responsible for making sure that every aspect of the job is satisfactory and to their liking. Your contract should also state that the client is ultimately responsible for any errors, even if the copy they supplied you was correct. Now, that's an important one. Even if the copy they supplied you was correct. There are many times where the client will have proofread the copy diligently, maybe had other people proofread it before they send it to you. And that automatically, in their mind, absolves them of having to proofread it again once you've used it, because, hey, you're just going to copy paste and we already know that the thing being copied is correct. It doesn't matter. You should remind the client that they still need to proofread the copy to make sure nothing has changed between the time they supplied it and the time they are approving it. And let them know that you are not responsible for any errors should they not do a full and thorough job proofreading the project. In fact, you should be telling them that you are not responsible for anything on there once they approve it. Their approval wipes the slate clean as far as you're concerned. In fact, the only time you are responsible for an error is if it happens after the client approves the job. And I hate to say it, this has actually happened to me. There was a project I did, and this isn't too long. This is going back within the last year, I think. I had a job that I had done for a client, and they had done one of those, it's approved with one minor small change to it. And I went in, I made the change that they asked for. I created a new PDF and I sent it off to them and saying, I'm not sending this job out without you approving this change. Well, the client said, okay, fine. Yes, the change is made. They approved it. They sent it back to me and I sent the job to the printer. Now, of course, that didn't take just a couple of seconds. I sent out the proof. It was the next day before they got back to me. Well, I don't know what happened, but they approved it. And then I took the job, created the proper PDF to send to the printer and sent it off to the printer. But for some reason, I don't know if I didn't save the file. And I don't know how this could have happened because anytime you close the document, if it's not saved, it'll ask you to save it. So I don't know if I just said don't save whenever I closed it. I don't remember if the program I was using crashed or if my computer crashed and the change was never saved. But the copy I had on the computer that I sent to the printer did not have that change on it, even though the PDF proof I sent to the client did. So the client saw the proof, saw the change was made, signed off on it, and then I sent the printer the version before the error was corrected. So in that case, I was to blame. And I ate the cost on reprinting that job because I know that was my error. But that's the only time that a designer should be responsible, is if the error happens after the client has approved the job. Now, you should also be letting the client know that just because they proofread a section and it's okay, doesn't mean in subsequent proofs that they don't have to look at that section, because things happen. Maybe as you were moving the document around, you're moving the window, you happen to click on a text box or you happen to click somewhere and it moves something shifted, or who knows, maybe the cursor was somewhere and you didn't realize you ended up touching the keyboard and an extra character got thrown in somewhere. And if it's a section of the job that the client has already proofread and thinks is okay, there could be, if you're sending another proof, there could be an error in that section now. And I have seen this happen as well. Now, the client might not like the idea, but the client has to know that every time you send a proof to them, they need to proof the entire job, not just the part where the changes were made. Because again, they might say, well, I approved that like 3 or 4 proofs ago, and the final approval that they sign off on has an error in that section, but the error was not there when they signed off on that proof or sent back a previous proof with revisions. And they could come after you and say, hey, well, that error wasn't there before. That's your fault. That's on you. No. Once you sign off on the final proof, if there's an error there, it's on the client, regardless of if it happened after or after they initially saw it. So remind them that even though they're looking at only the things being revised, they need to look at the whole project to make sure that no errors had happened or occurred. Now, as I said earlier, I hope you're using a contract, but in the case that you're not, or if you have a blanket contract like I do with some clients, what you should do is include a clause or even just a simple statement in an email or when you talk to them, reminding them of their responsibility. Whether you're talking to them on the phone and just remind them, say, hey, please make sure you proof it carefully. I'm not responsible if there are any errors. Once you sign off on it and you give me final approval, then any errors afterwards are your responsibility. They're not mine. So please make sure you do proof it properly. Or write something out in an email, reminding them of that clause in your contract. It's a simple thing to do. You can have even a blanket one that you use anytime you send out a proof. If you're emailing a proof to somebody, just have this paragraph that you copy and paste or use something like text expander to include it. And something that just states to them, again, they are responsible. You are not to have any blame for any errors that are discovered after the client has signed off on the final job. So even if it is in your contract, or if you're not using a contract, I would send that out with every proof you submit. Now, what sort of things can help prevent errors? The first thing I'm going to mention is spell check, and it should be a no-brainer. But you know what? We get complacent at times, and I know I've even done it where I've produced an entire job before and never once did I check the spelling on it. And it's after the fact, especially when I get a proof back and the client is saying, well, there's a bunch of errors here. Can you fix this, 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 this? And then I realize it's like, oh, that all could have been avoided if I'd just done a spell check on the job. So make sure you do run a spell check. That's the first thing. The other thing is proofread your own work. Now, I'm not asking you to proofread an entire novel if you're laying out a book for somebody, but if you're doing a business card or even a flyer, read the content. You might not want to, it might be boring, but just read through it to see if anything catches your eye. Now, one thing I know, and I don't remember the percentage, but I heard once that there are more errors found in headings than there are in body copy. And the reason for that is more people will just glance at a heading then they spend time reading the body copy. So even people proofreading it, they just think because the type is bigger, the font is bigger, there's less chance of there to be an error. So they just glance at it quickly. And that's why if you look through newspapers or even magazines, there's a lot of times you will find a spelling mistake in the heading and you say to yourself, well, wow, that one was so obvious. Well, it's not so obvious if you're proofreading and you just glance at it. So the tip with headings, and this is something I learned a long time ago, is don't read a heading from left to right. Read it from right to left. This forces you to look at each word individually. You're not reading a sentence, you're reading individual words from right to left. And by doing this, you'll catch more spelling errors because you have to stop at every single word. And this is something we learned when I was at the print shop and we had to proofread each other's work, is anytime there was a heading, you start at the right. And I usually would put my finger under each word just to make sure I'm focusing on that one word. And I would read the word, the next to the left, the next to the left, and I would go backwards down the sentence. And you'd be amazed at how many times you would pick something up that way that you might not have seen going forward. If you just want to know how easy it is to miss something that's spelt wrong, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there's this paragraph that went around the internet a while back, and I did hunt it down. And it claims to be a study from Cambridge University. Now, I know that that was debunked, that it wasn't a real study. I don't know who came up with this, but even though the paragraph says it was a study at Cambridge University, it wasn't. But it doesn't deter from what the paragraph is. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, and tell you what, I'll include the paragraph in the show notes for this episode, so you can get to it by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 81. What this paragraph is every single word in the paragraph is misspelled. And not just misspelled. What they did is every word, the first letter is correct and the last letter is correct. But all the letters in between have been scrambled, mixed up. And yet you can read that paragraph perfectly, or most people can look at that paragraph and actually read it from top to bottom, the entire paragraph, even though every single word in it is misspelled. And it's because your brain works in a strange way where it associates words to the left, to the right of the one you're reading, and it looks at the first letter and last letter, and then it sees the other letters in between. So it kind of makes out what the word is. And then you just keep on going. So it just shows you how easy it is to read something and miss an error in it. Like 2 letters that somebody was typing and their fingers stumbled, or I know I do this all the time whenever I'm typing something. I'm a graphic designer and I can't tell you how many times I have typed graphic design instead of graphic design because I always mess the N and the G up. And it's just one of those things that your mind just doesn't register. So you have to be diligent when you are proofreading. Now, again, it is not your responsibility to proofread. It's your client's responsibility. But you should do it yourself because if you can help out, if you can find something, an error here or there, then all the better. It's one less thing for your client to possibly miss and turn up in the printed piece. And the final thing I'm going to say is when you do submit a revision or a proof to a client, usually a revision, supply a list. Even though the client told you what changes to make, supply a list back to them saying, here's the proof number 2, 3, 4, whatever. Here's a list of what's been changed on this proof. And that way the client knows exactly what was changed. Because I don't know if you've ever gotten this before, not just a paragraph, a page full of change this in this paragraph, change this here, this. And you're going through, and sometimes it's really hard to understand what the client's asking. And you go through that whole thing, and it is very easy for you to forget or miss one of the changes that they asked for, especially if it's 2 or 3 pages worth of changes. It's very easy to miss one little line they put in and said, oh, whatever, add a period to this sentence or make a change here, and you miss that. So by supplying a list of revisions, you can say, please compare this list to the changes you asked me to make. And then, of course, include the paragraph to say that you are not responsible for any errors, and it is their responsibility to proofread the entire document again, not just the changes that were just made. So that's basically what I wanted to talk to you about today. I mean, we're graphic designers, we're human, and just like everyone else, we make errors. And you know what? That's okay. Things happen. Fast typing fingers might miss a beat. And sometimes things just go wrong. Accidental mouse clicks can shift things on a page. Copy and paste could miss something if it's not highlighted properly. Face it, errors happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you might as well protect yourself as best you can so that the blame for those errors doesn't fall on you. Now, I would love to hear some of your proofreading stories, whether something happened with a client or something happened to you. Please leave me a comment at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 81 and share with the group. Now, as I mentioned, I don't have a question of the week this week. I didn't bother going to look to see what I had. I'm on impromptu holiday, but I thought I'd still find a little bit of time to get this podcast out. I still would love to get your question. As I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think I have very many. In fact, I might only have one question left to answer. So if you have something that you want me to answer on a future episode, and that future episode could be coming up very soon, considering I think I only have one question left. So submit yours by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback. Now, I do want to share a iTunes review that I received. And this one came in from DD514 from Canada. It says, freelancer's goldmine of advice, ideas, strategies. I've been binging through episodes for the last few weeks, and there is actionable advice in every podcast I've listened to so far, older posts included. Really appreciate the wise words and advice. Please do not stop. Thanks for everything. Another Canadian designer, Danielle. Well, thank you for that, Danielle. I do appreciate the review, and I love each and every review I get from all around the world. So regardless of where you live and what iTunes store you leave a review in, I will receive it. So if you would like to leave one, you can visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, and that will redirect you to your iTunes store and automatically bring up the Resourceful Designer podcast, where you can conveniently leave a review for it. Now, before I go, I just want to remind you of this week's resource of the week, which is coolors.co, and that's COOLORS.co. My new favorite place for creating color palettes, especially for websites, but for all design projects. It makes it so easy to set up, to save, and to share the palettes. So give it a shot. So thank you for sticking through to the end of the podcast. Hope you enjoyed this week's topic, and I will be back again next week with something new. In the meantime, I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your graphic design business, and as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.